And we are live Saturday, July 28th. I'm back here in HQ, and I believe all systems are operating normally. I am very pleased to have back with me today one of my favorite guests who we haven't seen in a little while, the co-commander-in-chief of the global cloud-centric crime scene investigation unit, famously known as Able Danger. David, hello.
Hello, Jason. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Likewise. Good to see you, sir. Now, we're going to be talking about a number of things today. Specifically, we're going to be talking about reverse engineering these high-value target and mass casualty events that have become shockingly commonplace. And we're going to get to that momentarily, but there are a number of things on the docket today, aren't there?
Yes, that's right. I believe you're going to be talking with Field for 5 minutes or so at the beginning of the show.
That's right. Field did contact me with some urgency, and he appears ready. So let's get Captain McConnell on the line here, and we will be joined by Field in just a moment. He has some pretty awesome and shocking news to share with us. Does that say add? Okay, wait a minute. Skype is always changing how it operates. Let's see if that does it. That ought to add him there. This has to do with Air Force One. And let's see if we can get Field on the line there. Now, David, I must apologize that we were not able to include you in the festivities there at the Plum City Plunge last week. I had hoped to get the mobile Skype hardware involved, but there is a shocking lack of cellular data coverage in Plum City, Wisconsin. Captain McConnell, welcome. Lovely to see you, sir.
Well, welcome to you too. And as I said in a couple of emails and also one conversation, I'm not trying to take time or redirect your show. Is David on yet, or is he waiting?
He is. He's with us.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. How can I do this the quickest and easiest for you, Jason? You know what the subject is, but go ahead and prompt me.
Well, you sent me a really interesting and somewhat alarming video this morning that is related to what we now believe was an assassination attempt, an attack on Air Force One that coincided with President Trump's departure from the G7 summit while he was en route to the now completed historic summit with Kim Jong-un. And Field, you've put together some of the pieces that are leading to the conclusion that Able Danger has thwarted this assassination attempt by essentially predicting it. And I'm just showing that video briefly here. Why don't you fill us in, Field, because you have all the details, and let's just, for now, the floor is yours, and take it away.
Well, I thank you for saying I have all the details. I certainly don't. I don't understand 100% of all of this stuff, and I don't want to take time away from David because we're going to be doing this again on Monday's show. But this morning when I woke up, I had a 2.5 minute, the thing that you're showing right here, I believe it is 2.5 minutes roughly. Let me just check. Oh, I can't. Yeah, 2:42. Okay, I saw that, and I saw a comment that whoever put this YouTube out was crediting Able Danger for thwarting an attack on Air Force One. Well, I didn't remember that. And so I asked my wife, Denise, I said, do you recall me ever talking about a threat on Air Force One? And she said, yes, I do. I know you did, but I don't know when. Well, it didn't take us too long. Denise and I worked side by side, but different ways. And we contacted the gentleman who put this out. And I said, thank you very much for saying Able Danger helped save President Trump. But what caused you to make that statement? Well, then he sent me the 15-minute video. And in the 15-minute video, there's an exchange between David and I on a radio show we did on a Friday, where I was talking about something nobody normal would ever have heard of, Tacit Blue, TACITBLUE. And I put that in just to get the attention. And I see you pulled up the other YouTube. Okay, long story short, I talked to the guy. He directed me to the show that David and I did, where we're talking about a threat to Air Force One. And after I took a look at that, then it dawned on me that the reason I would have said that, and the reason it turns out that I did say that, is because when Donald Trump left the G7 meeting, he effectively told the other 6 countries that they'd have to get along without the United States because he wasn't going to play their game. Well, also, there's a lot of people that believe that North Korea has been used basically as an agent provocateur. I can't speak French, but the CIA apparently was trying to use North Korea to create acrimony between the U.S. and North Korea. Well, it certainly appears that Trump and the Prime Minister of North Korea realized that they were being whipsawed and lied to by the CIA. So what I believed past tense then, and I certainly believe today, I think that the people that did 9/11 really felt like they could not afford to have North Korea and the U.S. not acting as adversaries. So President Trump went over and talked to the guy from North Korea. They had a private meeting, and they solved a lot of things. And we're going to see a lot more global revelations. I'm not being coy. I am extremely tired, and I don't want to take time from David. So the bottom line is this. This morning when I woke up, somebody was giving Able Danger credit for blocking an attack on Air Force One. I didn't follow the logic. I've checked on the logic. It makes perfect sense now. We did not only, and maybe I should say Field McConnell, not Able Danger, because I don't want anybody else to get in trouble and I don't see how anybody can get in trouble for warning the military about an impending act of war. Whoever fired that missile, that was an act of war. You're trying to kill the sitting head of state of the United States of America. Here's the part where David gets a lot of credit. Going back, I contacted the man who made that, and I said, tell me why you think we blocked it, and he told me. And he sent me a message, which I will send to you both via email while you're talking and after I've gone. But he said the reason he put the 15-minute YouTube out last night, he was prompted to do that when he saw on our radio show ad for Monday an empty F-16. And here it comes, David. This is the credit to you. You're the one that came up with decoy and drone. And what saved President Trump and Air Force One, it appears, was there were 2 droned F-16s flying in formation with Air Force One because they thought that it was a credible threat of an attack. So they had 2 F-16 aircraft which could pick up all the electronic emissions that Air Force One was using. And it's my opinion that they would not have switched from the decoy to the drone electronically until they knew there's a launch signal. As soon as and there's ways they know when something gets launched. So after something was launched on Air Force One, they basically made either or both of those QF-16s into electronic twins of Air Force One. And I'm guessing, and you can see my hands, I'm guessing they also directed both of those F-16s away from Air Force One. So whichever F-16 would be targeted by the already airborne and underway missile, it would impact an F-16, not Air Force One. Now, I know that's disjointed, but this has just come to me this morning. I'm extremely tired, but I thought it would be good for Jason Goodman's Crowdsource the Truth and David Hawkins to basically scoop that story, because I'll be putting it out very publicly, and it'll be going to the addresses where it needs to go. And it's going to be up to the United States of America at some point to either give us credit for participating in saving Air Force One, or saying that we're nuts, in which case they can give me a blindfold and a cigarette. So, Jason, that's a snapshot of what's going on. I will be working on the radio show ad today, and I'll send it to both you and David. But I will send you a cryptic message I got from someone this morning when I started asking these questions that will make it a little bit more clear why this person is giving Able Danger credit for saving Air Force One. Over to you, Jason.
It's quite a amazing scoop there, Field. And I mean, I watched this video earlier, and I certainly was surprised. There's some news footage cut in there talking about this is a naval base that the Navy says does not have missile launch capability, but quite clearly seems like a missile launching. Now, I don't know where this footage was cut together from. Who, David, would have the capability to, do such a launch against the will or without the knowledge of the President and the Navy?
Well, it's the who is, I think it's more interesting to ask the what technology and what systems with people who access to the right keys could launch that system. And what I'm planning to discuss with you today, Jason, is that this network of AWACS systems, I think there's about 70 around the world, and of course that links through to the AWACS weapons directors, and the AWACS weapons directors can basically launch chemical, biological, radiological, and explosive anywhere in the world at will. It's the pervasive command and control technology that controls the skies, land, and sea-borne assets of the Five Eyes countries and their enemies. Over to you.
That's amazing. So they, without the knowledge of the President, and even in this example that Field is giving us, in an attack on the U.S. President, there's a command structure that allows for such a sophisticated launch that it could potentially strike Air Force One.
Absolutely, and that command structure was set up in the late 70s.
Is that
Jason,
SES?
can I interrupt and say goodbye?
Yes. Sure, Field. Thank you for this information. David and I will carry on.
Yes, and I'll be working on it all day, and I'll keep you
bye, Field.
abreast. Yeah, goodbye, David. Goodbye, Jason. And the short answer is Serco and the patents. David, over to you, and bye-bye to Jason and David.
Thanks, Field. I thought I think I knew he was going to say that, David. Serco would be behind it, and of course, we're going to be exploring your amazing technique of looking at the technology and the patents to, that describe the unique footprint of this type of attack. And, David, I must apologize before we get underway because I haven't had you on in a while and I've been trying to connect with you. I really appreciate you having patience with me. We've added quite a few subscribers to Crowdsource the Truth since our last show. And if there's anyone watching who's not familiar with David and Field, I would ask if they've been hiding under a rock, but I would also instruct them to check out abledanger.org, A-B-E-L, danger.org, and you can see the daily intelligence briefings that Sherlock Hawkins is putting there, and read all kinds of really in-depth information about MH17, MH370. You can, of course, support the work of Able Danger through Patreon and watch all of their videos and hear their radio broadcasts. We're also going to talk today, David, about your new approach to a crowdfunding process that will utilize live shows and docudrama type motion pictures to illustrate these unsolved crimes with the cloud-centric crime scene investigative unit that you and Field have put together across the globe.
Well, yes, that's absolutely right, Jason. And the challenge, of course, is we are into some really deep, dark stuff, and it can be technically exceedingly complicated and confusing. So it was a bit of a breakthrough when I realized that work I had done in the 1980s on artificial intelligence in the oil industry and I'd actually filed a patent for the deductive computing machine, which essentially allows you to simulate what you believe to be true and compare the simulation with reality and see if there's a conflict, which tells you not that reality is false, but your simulation is false. So I invented and perfected and developed and applied a system called the deductive computing machine in the oil industry. And interesting, I don't know if you're a numerologist, and I'm fairly sure I'm not one, but I revisited the patent, the deductive computing machine, and I noticed that the priority date was 11/11/88. So I have a friend of mine who's interested in numerology, and she ran my name, David Charles Hawkins, through something that counts up a number for me, and I end up with 11 and 8 and 3. And she said, or maybe I interpreted her correctly or incorrectly, that whatever it is I've done with many colleagues who worked with me along the way is unstoppable, because really it's a mechanism or an instrument for establishing the truth when people, the media, the government, or various other parties are telling us what happened to the and going into the patent office, what you can do is you can simulate various patent combinations, effectively doing a virtual systems integration, and then apply it to the crime scene and see if the behavior of the simulation matches the evidence at the crime scene, which may, of course, include, and does in the case of 911, evidence being removed, which is a felony called spoliation.
Right. Well, it's a lot to absorb right there, David. I am not a numerologist, but I do notice these coincidences, and I am aware of the, I don't know if it's a science or a practice of numerology, and I will tell you that in my weekly shows with Quinn Michaels, which is coming up later today at 6:30, we're spotting a lot of these patterns and looking at the significance of what the number combinations mean to people who do study numerology. And you, of course, have spoken to me many times about how the British corporation Serco actually controls the U.S. Patent Office. We've spoken about how the British Crown has utilized these patents and other techniques and tactics to manipulate the U.S. government. And then when we look at an event like this that Field has just pointed out to us with the missile launch on Air Force One, there's obviously quite a bit of technology in there. So I was really interested to hear your approach and see how we can reverse engineer this. Obviously, Air Force One might be the highest value target for an attack that you could imagine. The President of the United States and the crown jewel of the Air Force in terms of technological prowess. What can you tell us about what Field has just shared with us, and how does the deductive computing machine work into that analysis?
Excellent question. And let me run back to World War II, the early years of World War II, specifically September 1940. And the British, Winston Churchill and his advisor, Victor Rothschild, who died in 1990, were very concerned because whilst the British had developed some extraordinarily powerful technology for defending or attacking an enemy, including Nazi Germany, their production capability was being progressively degraded by the bombing from the Luftwaffe. So they desperately needed access to a greater production capability, which of course resided in the United States. But the United States, not because they're not capable of doing it, they hadn't gone to war when the British had in September 1940, and they hadn't prepared for war in the run-up to, the declaration of war on Germany. So the Tizard mission, apparently they carried a big trunk of stuff, including some prototype and specifications for various devices, three of which I think particularly, there's the cavity magnetron, there's the device, the proximity fuse, that was it, sorry, that escaped me, the proximity fuse, and a very interesting technology called IFF, identification of friend or foe, that by September 1940 had been built by a British electronics company called Foran. Those three three devices were absolutely decisive in the outcome of the war. And the deal was struck, in a series of meetings between the military high command in the United States, various industrialists, and the British, that the British would transfer some of the patents or the rights to the patents to the Americans, and the Americans would start producing some of these technologies and share that with the British, so the Five Eyes countries, if you will, could be empowered to prosecute the war and ultimately defeat Germany and the Axis powers, Italy and Japan.
Wow.
So particularly interested in what happened to those technologies and how they were developed into the 911 attack. And what's extraordinary, I don't know if you knew that, Jason,
Did not.
but on 911, Captain Gerald DeConto, the duty officer in the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, realized that there was an oncoming weapons platform that was trying to, let's hope it was a secure communication system. It obviously wasn't, because the American command and control systems had been hacked through these AWACS devices. He got on the communication to Secretary of the Navy Gordon, and he asked for authority to override the algorithmic clamp, if you will, on the missile battery on the roof of the, so the missiles could take out what was coming his way, and stop treating it as a friend. We believe that Gordon England stole Captain Gerald, and literally, obviously on a scale problem that's not a very realistic script, that hit the Pentagon went straight between the ears of Captain Gerald DeConto, which is a rather gruesome thought, because there wouldn't have been a lot left of Captain Gerald DeConto. But whatever it was that hit the Pentagon, and this comes back to the deduction, you need to apply basic laws of physics and conservation of energy, matter, and time to see if what was alleged to have hit the Pentagon, which is a guy flying a Boeing civilian airliner, is consistent with the debris and the damage at the Pentagon. And it obviously isn't. And you don't need to have a computer-aided simulation to do that. Anyone who looks at the designs of some of these objects will realize it. But whatever hit the Pentagon punched a hole through 8 walls, right through to the inner courtyard, where it created a 12-foot diameter hole with, I would guess, 1.5 tons of debris inside the inner courtyard of the Pentagon. And Jason, that is not a Boeing civilian aircraft. Over to you.
I totally agree, David. And, you know, there's been so much information about this, so many inconsistencies with the official story, and as you've said, what we see right before our very eyes. I think everybody knows that civilian commercial aircraft are generally constructed out of extremely lightweight materials, aluminum and composites and things that really aren't designed to penetrate concrete. They're designed to be lightweight, and I'm just briefly scanning through a couple of the photographs that are available on the internet that sort of, you know, question, as you're saying, the official story. And I've watched a lot of episodes of a show called Air Crash Investigation, which goes into great detail about historical air accidents and shows actual news footage and interviews with survivors and recreations based on recovered black box data. And you start to get a good understanding for how these air crash sites look. The plane does not disappear. The plane remains. It's mangled, but all the parts are there. And one of the biggest concerns for me, I mean, in this photograph, David, we can see how from top to bottom, the whole building is taken out in a way that seems far more destructive than what a plane would be able to do. And people probably also recall that the World Trade Center on 9/11, after it was hit with 2 similar aircraft, had sort of elliptical holes in each of the buildings, and that seems kind of consistent with the shape of a plane, and the strongest element of the planes, I'm just looking for some images of this right now, the strongest element of the plane would of course be the engine. And so we would expect sort of an elliptical type of hole, not a perfect circle. I apologize, I didn't have these images ready, and I know there are people watching who are going to tell me that some kind of Israeli hologram was projected in midair with no substrate whatsoever to receive a purported holographic projection, which I am extremely confident no such technology exists. I have been involved in stereoscopic imaging and projection technology for many, many years, and my understanding of holography, physics, projection of light, there is no way that anything other than an airplane hit the World Trade Center. I don't believe they were commercial airliners. You and Field, of course, have spoken extensively about the BUAP, the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot, which may well have been used to turn 737 type aircraft into drones to crash them into this building. And that brings us back to this event with the F-16s. And as Field said, your deductive conclusion that drone aircraft were in fact used. David, have I got you? I think you might be frozen. David, are you there? I wonder if you missed all that. We were having some difficulties with David's Skype connection there. David, can you hear me? I'm going to try calling David back, and let's see if we can get him. Yeah, the fan seems not moving. I don't know if that was moving earlier, but let's get David back. It's always fascinating to speak with the agents of able danger. David Hawkins is my guest right now, and people can go to abledanger.org and learn all about their process. Something seems to have happened to David's internet connection because it's saying that he's offline. Let me try him again here, try to get David back on the line. Oh, have we got you, David?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, sorry, we lost you there for a moment.
Yes, I did hear you, Jason. I think I'm pushing the wrong button.
No problem, I hear you.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, and you know what we might do, David, is if we leave it on voice only, that might improve the bandwidth situation, because we were having you cut out a little bit there previously.
Okay, all right. So I've cut the video out there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now, yes, we were describing the phenomena of objects hitting the Pentagon, and of course, whatever hit the Pentagon or the World Trade Center buildings, it would be consistent with the physics of the object that's doing the hitting.
Right.
So, for example, to punch a hole through 8 walls of the Pentagon right through to the inner courtyard, you really need something that looks like a bunker buster missile, right? And so when I go into the patent office, virtual patent office, so to speak, I trawl around to see if there are any penetrator devices where the description of the device matches the signature at the crime scene. And lo and behold, we have a Lockheed Martin hardened accelerated penetrator system that fits perfectly the description as we know it, or the photographs of what we see at the Pentagon. I want to come to this storyboarding process as a means of communicating to the public who might have no special knowledge. One of the things of any crime under the law is if there's evidence of spoliation, technically evidence has been added, subtracted, or concealed, or manipulated, we, that is we the people, I guess, are technically entitled to an aggressive inference of guilt. So when we see a line of people outside the Pentagon, I think they've got their little FBI T-shirts to add a certain amount of credibility. But this is before the lintel of the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center collapses. So it's about 10 minutes after impact. These guys, them as a fellow with some earpieces or something who's communicating with someone somewhere, and they're picking up evidence. They're taking it away from the crime scene. This is a crime scene. Forget about the terrorism. What should have happened at the Pentagon is a yellow tape should have been right around the offended and no one goes in or out without someone with authority controlling ingress and egress, or infiltration or exfiltration. So that didn't happen. So we're entitled to assume, and when I say we, back to the audience of these 3-act shows that I'm hoping to put on with a production company, we in the audience, when we see that either in the real world or in a world up on a stage, we are entitled to assume that whoever organized those people to pick up the evidence is guilty of the crime.
Interesting enough, Robert
really
Mueller was the FBI
sorry.
director. Well, at that time, Robert Mueller had just become the FBI director 1 week prior.
Absolutely. And so when these guys show up, the point is, it's very easy to see their faces. If the media was doing its job, and of course they're pathetic and useless, they would say, well, couldn't we interview one of these guys with his FBI T-shirt? And you know what I think we're going to find, and it's going to be rather horrifying for the Americans perhaps, is there's a jail up here in British Columbia out at Abbotsford called Matsqui, and there's a whole bunch of prisoners in there that would have been controlled potentially through an invention by a man called Jerome Lemelson.
I've heard
who
of him from you before.
605 inventions to his credit, right?
Yes.
And I think in the last year of his life he applied 60. He's generally considered to be, from someone point of view like myself, he applied for a patent and sweated blood and spent thousands of dollars in trying to prosecute the patent. In fact, for the deductive computing machine, he's generally considered to be a patent troll. Now, there are a number of frauds potentially available to Jerome Lemelson that he, I think, became an expert in. One is called submarining. File a patent application but don't get it published. And the other one is continuation frauds, where you tweak a patent to get another 18 years or 20 years of protection. Yeah, there he is, there. Now I'm saying to myself, how come this guy applies for a patent for prisoner tracking, and also applies and is it granted a patent for friend or foe identification? I mean, this is pretty strategic stuff. He looks like a charming old bastard, right? But he's actually the Jerome Foundation, or the Jerome Lemelson Foundation, took in $1 billion, and it distributes it to whoever the friends are of Jerome Lemelson.
Whoa.
But what he would do is, go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm just shocked by that.
Anyway, yes, there you are. You've got prisoner tracking and warning system and corresponding methods. So let me go back to 1985, when Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, and with the greatest respect to Field, and lots of people who've heard me talk about Christine Marcy, I think they're all underestimating the power of this woman. And let me give you a few reasons. In 1985 or 1984, she launches the United States Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund with Eric Holder. She appears to take the money or steal the money from the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund and buys a Boeing 727 for the United States Marshals Prisoner Transportation Service. Turns out in 1985, yeah, there she is, there was a small fleet of aircraft used by the Marshals Prisoner Transportation System, and all of those aircraft from drug lords. So in 1985, this woman creates the world's largest prisoner transportation system, and obviously a facility where she can dip into a prison, put together what I would call a con air team, right, and fly them, let's say, from Matsqui jail up here in British Columbia down to Washington for a 911 rave. I don't know if you have the same term as we have up here. A rave is apparently what was staged at the Picton Pig Farm,
right,
where about 50 to 100 prostitutes were tortured to death in front of an audience of 1,700 to 2,000 people between 1996 and 2002. And it's all been brushed over by people who've decided that little Willie Picton, who's mentally challenged, right, was responsible for the whole lot. So he's in jail with a double life sentence. But when the jury sat to listen to this guy, they said there's no evidence of planning and premeditation, so we can't hit him for murder one. So they've given him a double life sentence for second-degree murder, which means the people who staged the raves, which involved the real-time snuff films and the murder of some seriously disadvantaged women in the downtown east side, Jason, they're still out there.
Wow.
And they've been in power. Now, where does that fit in? Well, Christine Marcy, and I'm back to this extraordinarily dangerous woman who should have been behind bars. In fact, when I first met with Field and talked about it, we had a book, Brother Cain and Sister Abel.
Right.
Because I said to Field, either your sister's going to kill you, Field, or you're going to kill her. Well, Cain killed Abel, so you got a choice. Do you want to be Brother Abel and Sister Cain, or Brother Cain and Sister Abel? So he decided, I think we got that right, that he'd rather kill her than she's going to kill him. And I'm not joking, Jason, because obviously I think the brother is going to pick up a gun and shoot the sister. But either one or the other will be responsible for the death of the sibling. Over to you.
Wow. I mean, it's shocking information, David, and I appreciate the way that you've built this story over time, and we revisit certain elements because it's worth repeating, it needs repeating, and really that's the only way that these complex kind of ideas can be absorbed. Now, I don't want to redirect us to someone who I know you don't want me to talk about, but this individual, Kevin, has resurfaced, and he has been so persistent that I think the persistence itself is noteworthy. He has taken to contacting Kevin Shipp, who is the former CIA officer that I've been speaking to recently. I just started a new show on Patreon only with Kevin Shipp called Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. And apparently Kevin, Warsaw Kevin, who was trying to convince me that you and Field were lying to me about something, but did not present compelling evidence to support that statement, he's now saying the same thing to Kevin Shipp. So I would have to say that his activities strike me as those of someone who is trying to create division between you and I, division between you and Field and I, and now division between Kevin Shipp and I, and I don't understand why he's doing that other than to try to discredit the things that you're saying about Christine Marcy. He is just constantly banging on about how Christine Marcy did not start the SES, and he doesn't seem to be addressing the substantially significant details that you're presenting about her involvement in arranging the JPATS system, the prisoner transport system that has created essentially its own Air Force that most people don't even really know about. He's sort of throwing shade at individual details of comments that have been made that maybe are possibly inaccurate or have small misstatements in them. But my initial alert to this person's possible motive was the immediate and just insistent statement that you, or anyone for that matter, is deliberately lying to me. Because my first presumption would be, well, maybe there's a detail that's incorrect. What do you think about this?
Well, basically, I would ignore him because he's not addressing the issues that I'm addressing. Because what I'm saying is, when you have these very complicated crimes with multiple actors, and I've been trying to communicate what I believe to be true now for years, and it's very, very difficult, particularly when you have rather specialist backgrounds. You know, I'm an engineer and an inventor, and I've worked in artificial intelligence and simulation and truth-based reasoning and that sort of thing. And that's not, you know, my late wife, you know, she'd listen to me very politely. Then I'd see her eyes glaze over, and a number of quite friendly with me, say that I'm the best possible cure for because, a few sentences from David Hawkins and they're off, for a long, soothing sleep.
Well, I think the
and that's
topics
okay
that you're
because,
discussing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, David, but the topics that you're discussing are so above most people. And to be honest, the first 2 or 3 times I had you on the show, I didn't fully absorb what you were saying, which is why I made that comment about repeating these things. And that brings us to the crowdfunding idea of making these docudrama type films to explain these concepts, because if I understand your idea correctly, the notion is a motion picture, an entertainment type, an edutainment type production, whether it's a live play or a motion picture, would really illustrate these things to people in a way that more people are able to absorb than simply being spoken to about it. And right now I just want to direct people to this GoFundMe campaign that you've just started, and people can search GoFundMe.com/David C. Hawkins CSI Storyboards. I'll put this link into the comments, but people can help you crowdfund these productions on this GoFundMe page.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all of this is novel to me, but it occurred that whilst the 911 Commission said no one did red team analysis, which is a way of getting inside the head of the red team, the baddies, the attackers, with a view to finding out how they would get suicide pilots to fly planes into targets. And of course, that's, put it crudely, is bullshit. I mean, they were doing analysis years before 911 to find out who or how to launch an attack on the scale of 911. That was years in the planning. I think probably the impetus was triggered after they failed to bring down the World Trade Center in 1993. But you see, that's very interesting. As you reverse engineer these crime scenes, you find out that Ramzi Youssef, who's allegedly the bomber of the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, fell into the custody of Field's sister, right? Yeah. Christine Marcy, who flew the man to ADX Florence, which is the Supermax jail that I believe she and Jamie Gorelick, or Gorelick, however she pronounces her name, they created this jail, and Ramzi Youssef had a couple of cell members on either side. I don't know if he was in the middle. He had Ted Kaczynski, Unabomber,
yeah,
and Timothy McVeigh,
the Oklahoma City
in the
bomber.
Custody of Christine Marcy.
Yeah.
Right? When she was senior counsel for detention and deportation program of Immigration and Naturalization Service. So I'm thinking, wow, if you wanted to get some consultants on how to bring the towers down after the failure of 1993, that wouldn't be a bad place to have these guys. And then you could wire them into some kind of covert communication system. Basically, you got not of terror, but of high explosives and the targeting some iconic buildings on 911.
Yeah.
Now, I think Christine Marcy decided that Timothy McVeigh was too big a risk. He was the guy who allegedly blew up the Murrah building,
right,
where incidentally they put a bomb underneath the child. So these are vermin of the highest order, which is another reason why I believe Christine Marcy should have been arrested and waterboarded, because
David,
she's much more valuable alive.
Sorry, they put a bomb under. You cut out there. They put their vermin. They put a bomb under where the
under
children
the child
are?
care center.
Right.
So there was a bomb outside, but you can see from the profile of the damage, there were bombs inside the building. But just backing up to Christine Marcy's idea of the crowdsourced funding for the CSI storyboarding. What I realized from my background, and it's just a gift from God and circumstance, I'm extremely well qualified to put together a simulation of a major crime through 3-act plays or movies. And digging into the business and the jargon, I find out that most successful films and plays are built around the 3-act concept, with, you're probably more familiar with this, 2 plot points, one at the end of Act 1 that spins the audience into Act 2, and the other at the end of Act 2 to spin the audience into Act 3. Does that make sense? Because you've got a background in this business,
absolutely.
Is Jason.
Absolutely.
So the interesting point is, what should be the focus of each of these acts? So I'm visualizing there's an audience riveted on the stage, and then a group of actors who've studied the hell out of the cast of characters assembled, and they witness the planning and progression of the conspiracy in time, starting with Act 1, which focuses on the script and the spot, what targets are to be taken out. Act 2 would be the shoot and the snuff. That is where you have a camera crew in position to get known as the money shot for the snuff film, which might be cameras outside the World Trade Center to catch the jumpers, splatting on the pavement. And there are pictures, and they're really, really gory, of the people as the pavement. And basically you get a pressure wave through the body, so there's blood and entrails all over the place. And then the last act would devoted to the spin and the spoil, short for spoliation. So I thought, if you could take an audience through those 3 acts with 9 scenes, at the end of it they would have an understanding from inside the brain of the conspirators. And these people, they're not smarter than you or I or Field or anyone, but they've been given a system that over decades, possibly centuries, has proven extremely effective at what are loosely called now false flag events, where the public is being steered towards thinking it's an external enemy, when in fact it's a domestic one. Over to you.
David, I have always heard about I have a friend who worked for ABC News at the time of the 9/11 attacks, and he did tell me that there was extensive footage of people hitting the ground, and he said it was disgusting. I've never looked at it, and as I am apt to do as you speak during these broadcasts, I bring up various images that are relevant to what you're talking about. And when you mentioned the bodies hitting the ground, I Googled that for the first time ever and saw images of it. I will not bring them up, but I'm showing right now someone jumping from the window or falling. I mean, I presume people were pushed out by heat. I don't encourage people to look at those images, but they're bad.
Well, 911 was described by Dr. Thomas Barnett of the Naval War College as the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history. When I saw that, I said, that is unbelievably arrogant, but extraordinarily precise. It just rang true. I'm thinking, but who has the resources to put on the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history? And it was presented, I believe. Go ahead, sorry.
Why would they?
Those questions we need to put in arrears, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Because the who and the why often steers the analysis away or towards the party that the people asking the question would like you to go into your favorite prejudices. It's the Jews, Illuminati, it's the Jesuits, it's the Pope, it's the Queen, etc. And I describe myself as a forensic economist, and so I have a few people, whether they're friends or not, who are forensic accountants, and they say, no, David, you're not a forensic economist. And I said, well, do you know what assets I'm tracking through crime scenes? Excuse me. And they say, well, money and stuff like that. And I said, no, there's one asset that is absolutely crucial from the point of view of a forensic analysis of a crime scene. And it's not the dollars, it's not the energy, it's not the material in the bomb. It's what I call, and I invented that concept just after arriving in BC, that I believe to be one of the most corrupt jurisdictions in the world, which might shock a lot of people.
British Columbia.
I developed it. Go ahead.
British Columbia is one of the most corrupt jurisdictions in the world.
Yes.
Wow. Sorry, please carry on.
Yeah. together with Canada, which again looks like a milquetoast friend of the United States, and obviously many Canadians are friends of the United States. But the commissioner of the RCMP, in around, I believe, 2000, at a law enforcement conference in Toronto, said Canada has become the international center or hub of drug trafficking, organized fraud, and money laundering. And anyway, but I don't want to divert too much, but just coming back. So I thought, well, if you can create a 3-act play, and that's what I've storyboarded Act 1, so there are 3 collages that I've got for the 3 scenes of Act 1, and then I'm leaving it hanging about what collages I will have for Act 2 and Act 3. But if I may, in respect of the Twin Towers, what I'd like to do is do what I think would be a very good plot point for the end of Act 1. Shall I do that?
Please.
Okay. Just going back a little. So remember, Act 1 is focused, and there's a cookie cutter approach here because I think we can do this for any crime scene. Act 1 is focused on the script, basically for the war game, and the selection of the targets, i.e. the spot fixing of the target. So in Act 1 of the Twin Towers Starnet Pass, Con Air, Friend or Foe, I visualize the audience is looking over the shoulder of the people who are placing bets on the time of death and the body counts on the 47th floor of the North Tower as Christopher Hyman, the chief executive officer of Serco, enters the room from the windows on the World restaurant at the top. And what he's doing is he's addressing a meeting of shareholders. And if we look at the shareholders of Serco, which was historically called RCAGB 1929, it was a wholly owned subsidiary of Radio Corporation of America, which had, I believe, its head offices in the Rockefeller Center in New York. But anyway, so you have Serco shareholders on the 47th floor listening to or obeying the instructions of Christopher Hyman. It would be very interesting, and this is what I'm proposing in the play, if that meeting was hosted by someone who had an interesting relationship with Serco by virtue of their employer or former employer being the investment banker for Serco.
Being the
and
what
the investment
for Serco?
banker for Serco.
Investment banker. Got it.
I'm sorry?
I missed what you said. Investment banker for Serco.
Yes. Is also the investment banker for United States President Donald Trump and the II, and there are no coincidences.
Wilbur
the investment
Ross,
banker for Serco, President Donald Trump, incidentally, immediately after 9/11, he's being interviewed, I forget whether it's CNN, and he's asked the question, what happened here? And he said, this building, or these buildings, were incredibly strong. He had actually gone around the building after the 1993 attack with the engineer who designed the building. And he said, excuse me, it was amazing. There were columns that were completely missing. But it still stood because the external frame of the building, it was an exoskeleton of steel girders. And he said there had to be explosives used to bring those towers down. It wouldn't be sufficient to hit the planes.
I believe
so
President Trump actually
ahead.
said. I believe President Trump actually said bombs was the term that he used.
I heard the word explosives, but
I could be wrong.
Maybe I got that wrong. Bombs or explosive.
Right.
The point is, to whatever extent I'm holding him accountable for that. If he said he believed explosives or bombs were used to bring those towers down, he's got a moral to continue with his inquiry. He's certainly now got the resources and find out what kind of explosives could have been used to bring the towers down, free fall under acceleration. And so I reproached Donald Trump and the generals around him. They called Theo McConnell, and so goes I go. and asked our opinion as to what brought those towers down. Well, Abel Danger knows what brought those towers down, and it was the various patented formulations of explosives developed in the United Kingdom and probably placed in the Twin Towers elevator shafts by the mechanics elevators of New Jersey, Palisades, New Jersey. And ACE elevators had 80 mechanics in those two towers, presumably 40 in each. And they had finished or were involved in the upgrade of the elevators inside the Twin Towers. Sorry, did you?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I heard something in the background. So those ACE elevator mechanics are alleged to have scattered like cockroaches. That is to say, they didn't get any of the victims in the elevator shafts released. They ran. And I've seen on the internet, you might be able to find it, that they ran back to, or they went to, I think, Delaware and England. So my argument would be, well, the FBI should have found out what those 80 elevator mechanics were doing and brought them or extradited them to some kind of court for interrogation. But Mr. Robert Mueller has decided he didn't want to do that.
Wow.
And he was the director of the FBI. Now, I'm bouncing around a little bit, but let me just tell you what I think would be a very gripping plot point for the end of Act 1 of Twin Towers Starnet Patents, Con Air, Friend or Foe. The audience is looking at these people who are betting in a death pool. And a death pool is an internet or an online capability where you actually bet on the death of the target and or the body count. So through the window of the World Trade Center from the 47th floor, as the Act 1 nears its high point or plot point, you see a dot on the horizon which grows. And gradually it would take the shape of whatever airborne platform, weapons platform we choose. It could be a Boeing civilian aircraft, it could be an A3 Skywarrior. It's almost irrelevant because it's not what carried the weapon that hit the Pentagon, what was in the weapon that hit the World Trade Center. And as it grows and grows, I believe the audience would be squirming in nervous anticipation. Do you think that would be a legitimate description,
Yeah.
Jason?
I do.
And as it gets larger and larger into view, and since it's coming straight towards you, there's no swept angle there, so it's easy to see what it grows into. And I would suggest it grows into some kind of weapons platform that is carrying one of those Lockheed Martin hardened, accelerated penetrator devices, missiles, if you will.
Right.
And as the Node, one of the Node brothers, interestingly, one Node brother was pointing a camera exactly at the point of impact on the north face of the North Tower, even though the device that impacted the north face of the North Tower was up to 1.25 seconds hidden behind the T building. Jules Node, or Gideon Node, swung his camera from a firefighter that was measuring a gas leak in down on the ground. They heard the noise of something go ahead. You probably know the technical phrase for that. He pans his camera, edits it, and zooms in. And if the camera had red crosshairs, you don't see the crosshairs, it actually stops 1.25 seconds before something appears from behind the AT and spears into the north face of the North Tower, and there's a bright white flash. Absolutely. This is the wonderful thing that you do, Jason, that no one else can do. You can synchronize your search on the web, right, with my words, and it makes it so much easier to communicate. And it's people like you interview me, I start thinking of why couldn't we do this in a theater, right? We can literally have a projection screen with the audience and the actors, and then the audience is being stepped gently, if that's the right word, through the procedures that the conspirators had to step through in order to get away at the end of the day with this bullshit about, as a guy, a long-bearded wanderer straddling a yak in a cave in Afghanistan, brought the most powerful nation in the world to its knees. He didn't. He couldn't. Right?
Yeah, as you go
Now,
into the details of it and how much technology is required and coordination, et cetera, it just makes that clearer.
Absolutely. So I visualize like did you ever see that film, The Sting?
Yes. Robert Redford.
Wonderful film where the ticker tape was delayed or accelerated, whatever. So what was appearing on the ticker tape was delayed so that the horses had crossed the line as the ticker tape was telling, the number one criminal with his bag of money that he still stood a chance of winning. And then at the last minute, there was a police raid and the guy lost his money. And I thought it was a wonderful film. But I like the idea of a sort of ticker tape where digitally you see the time where people are betting on the impact on the north face of the North Tower. Actually, it was 8:46 when the Goldman Sachs servers went down in the North Tower, and the business of Cantor Fitzgerald, the world's largest broker in sovereign debt, Eurobonds, and US government securities, $73 trillion a year, at that moment, or at least a very few minutes afterwards, that virtual business, $73 trillion a year, was switched from New York to London. So London took over those financial transactions almost seamlessly from what historically had been or was in the process of becoming the world's financial capital in New York. So when the dust settled in New York, thing reverted back to the status quo ante. Now, am I saying that all the Brits were... The Brits are just as much in the dark as the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians, and New Zealand, and everyone else. They're being manipulated. But I
You're
think...
saying the British government or the British population?
I think, yes, and a large part of the government as well, just like the United States, because it's an inner core of conspirators who have infiltrated the command and control systems of what historically was the Five Eyes countries. And they can operate what is known in the trade as a man-in-the-middle attack. And the camouflage they use is through these AWACS systems, where if you look at the system, the training system for AWACS weapons directors, which is patented by the, the Institute of Southwest Research in Texas. If you read the blurb, the abstract, what's incredible is the AWACS system can be switched from courseware, where you're teaching an individual, through to simulation, which is my speciality, to live fire. So who controls that switching process? On 9/11, there was a major exercise that was the live fire component of a full dress rehearsal on the 1st and 2nd of June called Amalgam Virgo, where the simulation had a Boeing, I think 72, hijacked over Alaska, flying south over Abbotsford, over that jail where I think some of these T-shirted FBI agents came from, turning south and then east, and its target was the Capitol building. So there was a 30-hour period in Amalgam Virgo where the defenses of the United States were stood down and control over airspace above the United States was handed off to the Canadian Air Force. And what the Canadians were doing, they were launching a red team attack on the United States as part of an exercise called Amalgam Virgo. What the conspirators would have done is, through this AWACS system, they would have monitored at what point the blue team would have been vulnerable to a switch from simulation to live fire. And Field has explained that to me, and I think I do appreciate his input, because he has the experience of this thing. When you do these red team, blue team war games, if the red team gets within 3 minutes of target, it wins. If the blue team can keep the red team out of 3 minutes of target, the blue team wins. Right? So yes, you've got the counterterrorism 1st and 2nd of June 2001. So when people say, oh, this bin Laden thing is a total surprise, I mean, they rehearsed it, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
Right? And bin Laden had an office in London, and MI5 and MI6 knew they had an office in London.
The construction
right? His
company,
planning
the
was,
family construction
sorry,
company?
go ahead.
The bin Laden construction company has an office in London? Is that it?
No, the bin Laden group, the Al-Qaeda, has an office in London.
Wow.
Started in 1994.
Wow.
Right? With the help of MI6 and MI5. Again, you know, you've got agents provocateurs in place, but let me just go back here. So you've got this very sophisticated system called the AWACS system, of which 70 were made, and 18 were sold to NATO.
Only 70
And
AWAC aircraft have ever been made?
17.
17, that's it.
70 were made. Obviously, the United States has got a lot of these NATO, AWACS aircraft. And I think Saudi Arabia got 1 or 2. The Australians have 1. I think the Brits have 3 or 4. But it's been sold quite extensively. This is an integrated system that is full of patented devices, including IFF interrogators, IFF transponders. And what that means is you can spoof the enemy into thinking the weapon that's heading their way is a friend.
Yeah, just
right?
to repeat,
and that's what
you
happened
said
on 911.
You can send a spoof signal to the enemy to make them believe that that an enemy is actually a friend. Is that what I understood?
Absolutely. And the technology was patented by Jerome Lemelson. Now, he patented one part or one element or one derivative of IF technology. The original IF technology was developed in the United Kingdom prior to World War II, and that was one of the technologies and the systems, I think it was made by Ferranti, that was taken out to Washington. And here it gets really interesting, because we're talking September 1940. The Tizard mission that I believe was sent by Victor Rothschild to the United States in order to do a trade between patents and production facilities. And obviously the companies that got the production rights in, for example, the proximity fuse or the cavity magnetron would stand a huge amount of money, because this is wartime. There's no limit on for an individual device. And lo and behold, I think you might be able to find it. If you Google cavity and RCA in 1940, you'll find that the cavity magnetron invented in the United Kingdom, patented in September 1940 by RCA in the United States, which then proceeded to produce the cavity magnetron in large numbers and make hundreds of millions of dollars of profit. Now, it's a private industry. Why shouldn't it? But I think it's very interesting that that trade between the United Kingdom and the United States made some people exceedingly wealthy. And that technique of grabbing a monopoly through the patent office can make people exceedingly wealthy, as we've witnessed today with the Facebook and the Bezos moguls, some of whom are apparently worth nearly $1 trillion. Well, they were until Abel Danger pointed out that Facebook was being used to entrap and blackmail pedophiles.
Wow.
And I don't know if you know, but Zuckerberg apparently lost $16 billion in one day. It's bad.
Yeah, largest single stock drop in U.S. history.
Right. And, what happened is if you look at the Facebook patents for facial recognition, these social engineering networks are very, very effective at baiting people into, let's say, pornography that might start off as adult pornography and is legal, but gradually as they weave their way deeper and deeper into this cesspit, they end up watching something or downloading something or participating in something that is highly illegal. involving the abuse of minors. And one of the specialities of a guy called Oliver Buck Revell, who actually took his son and daughter-in-law off the tarmac before they boarded Pan Am 103 in 1988 and saved their lives because the plane was blown up over Lockerbie in Scotland.
Right. So
my question is, how does this guy know, and why was he so worried about removing his son and his daughter-in-law? But again, I digress. So the idea of Act 2 would be, okay, we've taken out, or we've got something inside the north face of the North Tower. All of the television cameras and news are starting to focus on it. General Alexander Haig, the late General Alexander Haig, is interviewed at 9 o'clock on the morning of 9/11, 14 minutes after impact, and 2 minutes before the south face of the South Tower, in which the other Node brothers has got his camera focused. And General Alexander Haig is asked, well, who do you think is behind this? The man says, well, I don't want to speculate because I don't have the information, but we know to look. And there's a very weird hesitancy in his voice, like he's got some script that he's about to read out. So he wants to convey something, but he knows it might be interpreted by someone like myself as a very revealing remark, because he says, this is 14 minutes after impact, we know where to look at the Palestinian or bin Laden groups. Now, that's not bad sleuthing, is it? For 14 after impact, a totally event, and the guy comes up with what is supposed to be the right answer, the bin Laden group. Well, reading a script, Jason.
Yeah. No, it's...
Or actually, more to the point, he actually might have written the script.
Right. But when we look at patterns in these different events, the whole notion of, boy, it's funny, the video that came up right after that was the dramatic film Nixon, and it opened on a photograph of JFK, just as I was about to say, it fits the pattern of what you've referred to earlier in this conversation as a false flag, where in the case of JFK, they knew right away, oh, it was Lee Harvey Oswald. Oh, it was bin Laden who bombed 9/11.
And so Act 1, the script and the spot defines what the target is going to be. In gambling, it's called spot fixing, right? So in Act 2, we're talking about the shooting and the snuffing. The shooting, that is setting up a camera crew to capture the money shot. So I'm looking at Act 2. I haven't actually done the collage with my colleagues yet. And I'm thinking which high-value targets would be or represent a good plot point for the end of Act 2, and how would we dispatch those high-value targets? You see, there's a difference between a mass casualty event where you kill 343 firefighters in New York, which is it's an unacceptable number. There was no accident ever in the world where that number of those professional people, brave men and women, should be killed in a single event.
As a matter of fact, David, more New York City firefighters were killed on 9/11 than every other day prior combined since the advent of the New York City Fire Department.
Well, this is so interesting because you are, as I understand it, New York based, and you, I believe, could be one of the, if you're willing, one of the methods of transmitting to the people who loved ones died and done. Many of those people have been bought off with an insurance claim, or basically told, you open your mouth and you're dead. Right? Now, even the bravest firefighter confronting 343 dead colleagues would think twice about blowing the whistle. And so I'm coming back to who are the high-value targets to be snuffed. Now, a snuff film with a money shot means that some crew, they've got a picture or an image or a little video clip of the target being shot, and it's date and time stamped because they're gambling on the time of death. So I've been speculating, and maybe you'd like to join me in that speculation, or maybe the listeners would, about who would represent some really interesting high-value targets to be killed on 911. And let me just go through it, and maybe you can comment. So I could start with Carlton Bartel, right, who is the inventor of a carbon dioxide trading system, which was patented. And he worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. And on 911, I believe he was participating in a simulated carbon dioxide trading game. So he was at his computer, and the people monitoring his computer would have known that he was there and participating in the game. He represents an extremely high-value target because that patent, after his death, passed through to his widow, and then called Franklin Raines, who I believe was the president of Fannie Mae or Fannie Mac. Now, what rights does Franklin Raines, who's a black guy, so what? Well, maybe this is a good way of enriching a corrupt black man under a corrupt white man, etc., etc. But there's a phrase, I think, in Latin, cui bono. Who benefits from this? Right. Well, Frank did very well out of that, I presume, because the trading rights in that carbon dioxide patent are extremely valuable, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So maybe Carlton Bartels was a high-value target. And my sense is that the Christine Marcy Conair SWAT teams were equipped with a really nasty device called a biological bullet. Did you ever check what the biological bullet is about, Jason?
Yep, we've done some shows about it. It's a bullet filled with an agent that affects a particular group or has a specific biological effect, right?
Well, it could be an anticoagulant, so you bleed to death. It could be a nerve agent, so you go into some catatonic state. It could be a hallucinogenic, so you start foaming at the mouth, etc. So I think it's derived from the technology perfected by the British at the end of the 19th century, called the dum-dum bullet. Because I'm being a little, I hope you won't misinterpret me. It's a little bit of black humor. What the British back at the end of the 19th century found is there would be fanatical tribesmen who would come at them in waves, and the general bullet, that made a fairly small in these guys. Right. These guys could take about 6 bullets and then reach the squaddy from the British and cut his head off. So they took the technology of big game hunting, which was this dum-dum bullet, and at a town in India, they set up a factory to produce dum-dum bullets. And what the dum-dum bullet does, when it hits the body of the onrushing animal, rhinoceros or whatever, or the fanatical tribesman, it breaks up and expands, so you get to transfer all of the kinetic energy of the bullet into the onrushing tribesman, which slows them down a lot more than if it goes straight through them. Right. The stock of dum-dum bullets at the end of the 19th century that the British Army had around the world, they had 60 million, which is a lot of bullets, right?
I would say.
I doubt that the Department of Homeland Security, in its wisdom, about 2 years ago, ordered 1.4 billion rounds of hollow point ammunition.
Which is
and the interesting thing about hollow point ammunition, what are you going to put inside it?
Right.
Well, you have the patent for the biological bullet. You can put anything you like inside it, so that one nick from one of these kills you, or kills the target, right?
Right.
There's, let's say, a bit of ricin. I mean, it's a highly toxic. Now, even if the National Guard that might be turned out in the time of an insurrection, including the most brave men and women in the world, it's going to be pretty scary to be nicked by one of these bullets and you're dead.
Absolutely.
Right? Because a lot of people, I think, can, with a Kevlar jacket or whatever, figure, well, we can survive a regular bullet. But they would understand, particularly if there was a whole bunch of snuff films that showed how a prostitute at a pig farm might be hit with a bullet and die in agony. If that kind of stuff was circulating on the internet, and I can assure you, Jason, it is. There is a deep state where this kind of images, and we talked about, filming some guy jumping out of a building and landing splat on the pavement. There are the most horrific and disgusting that would put the fear of God even into the bravest individual, primarily because they don't know who the enemy is.
Right.
And that's what these 3-act plays will reveal. And curiously, the enemy is us.
What do you mean us? Well, to the government.
Our friends, the people we know, right? The people that we think are on our side, and in fact have fallen into this trap, and they will never reveal what they did to a child in front of a camera at 425 Carroll Street in Vancouver, where there was a raid on Starnet Communications, and they took away all of the kit, and the kit was related to networks that supported dead pools, child pornography, snuff films, and money laundering.
Wow.
There was a 100-person raid on Starnet Communications. They took away everything, but there were 2 teams, and this is coming back to the play, from the United States. Excuse me. One was from the IRS, the other was from Customs. I believe those teams were deployed by Christine Marcy. All of the evidence for Deadpool, child pornography, snuff films, and money laundering was taken south of the border. So the question is, where did it go? Coming back to that business about spoliation, we're entitled to an aggressive inference of guilt. The play that I'm proposing would suggest that technology was taken to building number 7 and installed on the 25th floor of building number 7, where there were offices for the IRS, the Department of Defense, and the CIA.
And
that was the command center
Yeah.
that was ultimately sacrificed on 9/11, because all of the evidence for the attacks in New York would have been contained in the servers on the 5th floor of building number 7, the Salomon Smith Barney building.
Wow. It's an amazing...
So now, go ahead.
It's an amazing narrative, David. It's truly shocking. So we're coming up on 90 minutes here. I think perhaps we should maybe close out soon and consider extending the conversation into another show in a few days.
Well, I'd love to. And let me just say where I think the final command center was, and that might be at the end of Act 3. I believe all of the information, the logs of the movements of the weapons and the targets were installed on the cloud, operated by the AWACS weapons directors. And then, fascinatingly enough, and this could be at the end of Act 3, we have to look at, well, who manufactured the AWACS weapons systems on the Boeing aircraft? It was Boeing headquarters.
Right.
Well, Boeing company.
Right.
So why did the Boeing headquarters move from Washington State to Chicago and for commissioning just before 9/11? I think that's the weapons for the attacks that are ongoing, like the fires, the attacks in California and Greece, are run out of the Boeing headquarters in Chicago, where you're into the Chicago outfit and overland. That would be an interesting ending for, I think, Act 3, Jason.
Absolutely. So Obama land is what you said in the last sentence, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Chicago outfit, where this guy who is of dubious origins, like where's his birth certificate?
Right.
He's a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies by virtue of his father, and he's a British agent that was groomed and installed to do some really nasty entrapment activities in Chicago, capture people who will never reveal what they've done to the victims, but I think he will be familiar with the techniques to put up the Picton pig farm. But maybe that's just guesswork. But it certainly merits, I think, to be as a possibility in the 3-act play. Over to you.
There's been a lot of talk lately about the Obama birth certificate, and I've examined it quite extensively. There are some extremely conspicuous things that cause me to believe it's a forgery. Distinct color difference between all of these numbers from the stamp and this number 1. People can look at the archives for Crowdsource the Truth to see a video that I did about the Obama birth certificate back in December of 2016. And of course, you can look into the research that's been done by Dr. Corsi and Sheriff Joe Arpaio and Mike Zullo. David, I want to thank you for that extremely comprehensive presentation. It's always good to hear your take on these things, and people can go to GoFundMe and help David raise the funds to create these docudrama type presentations that will illustrate the complex concepts that he's talking about. You can go to gofundme.com/David-C-CSI-storyboards. And the guest, of course, is David Charles Hawkins, inventor and raconteur. You can tell an amazing story about these details, David, and it's always fascinating to listen to. Was there anything else that you wanted to share with us today before we wrap it up?
No, you're very kind, and I look forward to the next show. And I do hope people can help us, because the model I'm thinking of, and I'm not familiar with production companies, is that if we can establish $100,000 in this fund, then I can help go to a joint venture with a proven and existing production company. And I would like to think that it would be possible to start rehearsing for the show, that is the Twin Towers Starnet patents, Con Air, friend or foe, by September the 11th of 2018 in Vancouver and in New York. And then switch on a public perception that even while the show may not exist, we have a script and we have a storyboard that will change the theatrical experience for millions around the world. Over to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, David, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help you. So definitely people watching right now should go over to GoFundMe.com and fund David's project so we can help get this production underway. You can also see more of David's research by going to abeldanger.org, A-B-E-L, danger.org. You can support Able Danger through Patreon. You can watch their videos on BitChute and on other platforms. And David is frequently doing radio shows with Captain Field McConnell. David, I want to thank you once again for joining me today. We will be back with you very soon, and thank you for your patience while I've been traveling and busy. And I will be back later today with Quinn Michaels. We're going to have a Patreon-only broadcast, so people who are joining us on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth will be able to enjoy that. David, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Jason. Bye now.
Take care, and thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you later tonight.